Now, the question is, the world can ill afford. Forget about one, it certainly cannot afford two wars happening at the same time. There is a knock-on effect, and the worst hit are the developing countries, India included. So the world needs to find ways to not just stop these two wars, but also how to find ways to insulate future generations from the ravages of conflict. This is on the back of a highly successful Quad summit that happened over the weekend in Wilmington, Delaware, the hometown of US President Joe Biden. A host of agreements were signed in this sixth Quad summit, including a significant one on joint exercises by the Coast Guards of all four Quad countries. It's called the Quad at Sea Observer Missions. It will start as early as 2025. This is a clear and present message to China that it cannot go about coercively trying to impose its own will and trying to change maritime boundaries or affect the freedom of movement and navigation in the Indo-Pacific. The question is, will the world rise up and deal with these multifold challenges, whether it is putting an end to these two wars in Russia, Ukraine, as well as in Israel and Gaza, or will it flounder? The Prime Minister speaking at the Summit of the Future.
Excellencies,
विश्व के सबसे बड़े लोकतंत्र
on behalf
भारत की ओर से
India, the world's largest democracy,
और 140 करोड़
and
भारतवासियों की ओर से
1.4 billion Indians,
आप सभी को नमस्कार।
greetings to all of you.
जून में अभी
In the
मानव इतिहास के
largest
सबसे बड़े चुनावों
election in
में
human history held
भारत के लोगों ने
recently in June,
मुझे
the
लगातार
people of India
तीसरी बार
have
सेवा
given
का
me the
अवसर दिया है
opportunity to serve them for the third
और
consecutive
आज
term. And
सिक्स्थ ऑफ ह्यूमैनिटी की आवाज आप तक पहुंचाने यहां आया हूं। फ्रेंड्स, जब हम ग्लोबल फ्यूचर की बात कर रहे हैं तो ह्यूमन सेंट्रिक अप्रोच सर्वप्रथम होनी चाहिए। सस्टेनेबल डेवलपमेंट को प्राथमिकता देते हुए हमें मानव कल्याण, फूड, हेल्थ सिक्योरिटी यह भी सुनिश्चित करनी होगी। भारत में 250 मिलियन लोगों को गरीबी से बाहर निकालकर हमने यह दिखाया है कि सस्टेनेबल डेवलपमेंट कैन बी सक्सेसफुल। सक्सेस का हमारा यह अनुभव हम ग्लोबल साउथ के साथ साझा करने के लिए तैयार है। फ्रेंड्स, सक्सेस ऑफ ह्यूमैनिटी लाइज in our collective strength, not in the battlefield. और वैश्विक शांति एवं विकास के लिए ग्लोबल संस्थाओं में रिफॉर्म्स आवश्यक है। रिफॉर्म इज द की टू रिलेवेंस। अफ्रीकन यूनियन को नई दिल्ली समिट में G20 की स्थायी सदस्यता इसी दिशा में एक महत्वपूर्ण कदम था। वैश्विक शांति और सुरक्षा के लिए एक तरफ आतंकवाद जैसा बड़ा खतरा है तो दूसरी तरफ साइबर, मैरीटाइम, स्पेस जैसे अनेक संघर्ष के नए नए मैदान भी बन रहे हैं। इन सभी विषयों पर मैं जोर देकर कहूंगा कि ग्लोबल एक्शन मस्ट मैच ग्लोबल एम्बिशन। फ्रेंड्स, टेक्नोलॉजी के सेफ और रिस्पॉन्सिबल यूज के लिए बैलेंस रेगुलेशन की आवश्यकता है। हमें ऐसी ग्लोबल डिजिटल गवर्नेंस चाहिए जिसमें राष्ट्रीय संप्रभुता और अखंडता अक्षुण्ण रहे। डिजिटल पब्लिक इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर should be a bridge, not a barrier. ग्लोबल गुड के लिए भारत अपना डिजिटल पब्लिक इंफ्रास्ट्रक्चर पूरे विश्व से साझा करने के लिए तैयार है। फ्रेंड्स, भारत के लिए वन अर्थ, वन फैमिली, वन फ्यूचर एक कमिटमेंट है। यही कमिटमेंट हमारे वन अर्थ, वन हेल्थ और वन सन, वन वर्ल्ड, वन ग्रिड जैसे इनिशिएटिव्स में भी दिखाई देता है। पूरी मानवता के हितों की रक्षा और वैश्विक समृद्धि के लिए भारत मनसा वाचा कर्मणा से काम करता रहेगा। बहुत बहुत धन्यवाद।
So the Prime Minister there addressing the Summit of the Future at the sidelines of the United Nations General Assembly, a very brief speech where he talked about how food security, health security and sustainable development are going to be critical going forward in the 21st century. He's reiterated a line that he had said earlier in the context of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, where he said the solution is not in the battlefield. And he also chided from the UN General Assembly hall, chided world countries to realize that reform is the key to relevance. Of course, India has been asking for a permanent seat at the United Nations Security Council. Aman Sharma, National Affairs Editor, is at the UNGA. He's tracking the developments as well as the Prime Minister's speech. Aman, so a very brief speech by the Prime Minister. He touched upon food security, sustainable development, health security, and also, most importantly, reiterated a line that he's used before, that solution to the world's problems cannot be found in the battlefield. Please elaborate.
Yes, absolutely, Zaka. I think 3 to 4 major takeaways from this short but very important speech. The Prime Minister clearly saying that our success lies in our collective strength, not on the battlefield. And you know, this is the version of the statement which he's made earlier, that this is not the era of war. A solution will not be found amidst blasts and bullets. It has to be found on the talking table. So I think the Prime Minister, since he's landed in America, we have seen him repeatedly say in his opening remarks at the Quad Summit and now at the UNGA Summit of the Future that there is a need for global peace. Territorial integrity and sovereignty needs to be respected. All the nations need to work around that. He's also mentioned territorial integrity and sovereignty in his speech at the UNGA just now. So clearly the Prime Minister is saying that, look, we have to find these solutions on the talking table. We can't find them on the battlefield. Another important pitch by India when it comes to the ongoing war between Russia and Ukraine, or even Israel and Palestine, because the Prime Minister also met the Palestinian president last evening in a bilateral meeting where he said that, you know, he asked for he said India desires a ceasefire and India stands with Palestine when it comes to the horrific loss of lives which are being seen in Palestine as a result of the war. Another important statement I think the Prime Minister has made about is the need for reforms in global institutions. He has said that look at the G20 platform. African Union was included in the G20 as a step in that direction to reform global institutions, and that is a clear message that India needs a place on the table when it comes to the UN Security Council. The Prime Minister making a clear case that if global institutions are not reformed, they are not in sync with the present times, and India has been making that case very strongly. Even the US, after the meeting between US President Joe Biden and the Indian Prime Minister in Delaware 2 days back, even the White House statement had said that US backs India for on this particular cause, that India should get a permanent seat on the UN Security Council. I think another important statement, Zaka, is on the global digital infrastructure. He has said the global digital governance model. He said India is ready to share its success in the digital public infrastructure mechanisms with the world, the UPI, the other mechanisms that India has started. He said global digital governance is needed, and digital public infra should not be a barrier, it should be a bridge. I think these are the 3 to 4 major takeaways from Mr. Modi's speech.
All right, Aman, keep an eye out for the rest of the Prime Minister's program today there in New York. It's his third and last day there in his 3-day visit to the United States. Started off, of course, in Delaware with the Quad Summit. So that's what I want want to focus on now. Thank you very much for joining us. I'm going to introduce our panelists. Rahul Chabra, former diplomat with the Ministry of External Affairs. Constantino Xavier is a senior fellow with the Center for Social and Economic Progress. Raymond Vickery is a senior associate Wadhwani chair in US-India policy at CSIS. And Seema Sirohi, senior author and journalist, is also joining us. Let me start with you, Mr. Chabra. So we had the Quad Summit, and I just want to run some of the top 2 or 3 outcomes, significant outcomes of the Quad Summit that happened over the weekend. The big one is the Maritime Security Initiative, the launch of the Quad at Sea, the Observer mission, which is set for 2025, cooperation between the Coast Guards of the 4 Quad countries, semiconductor supply chains, the establishment of a semiconductor supply chain contingency network, and also the United States will help establish a semiconductor fab unit in India for national security, and of course the Quad Cancer Moonshot Initiative. The underlying message, as has been the case from the first Quad Summit to the 6th one that concluded in Delaware, is that China cannot be allowed a free run, that China has to play by the rules of the established global order. It has to play by the rules of a free, fair and open Indo-Pacific. Do you reckon that the initiatives announced at the 6th Quad Summit in Delaware underline that fundamental message and that fundamental reasoning as to why these 4 countries came together in the first place?
Good evening, Zakat. Yes, thank you so much for having me on your show. You very well summarized the most critical aspects of that summit and the outcomes of the summit. And I think the message has gone out, may not be loud and clear, but the underlying message, it's been, the people who need to hear it have understood where we are headed. It seems to be the direction has been set. It doesn't have to be really hard in that sense, but the clear underlying message is there for people to understand.
Let me ask Constantino Xavier, but what relevance, or there is a view that some of these issues vis-a-vis China, the South China and East China Seas have been sort of forced to be pushed to the back burner because the most pressing concerns right now that the world is facing are the 2 wars. Just as we were all looking to a ceasefire in the Israel-Hamas conflict, it seems like Israel has now opened another front with Hezbollah. There is the ongoing Russia-Ukraine war, which is now going to go into its 3rd year in the next few months. You think the fundamental long-term threat emanating from China has somehow been relegated to the back burner because of this?
No, I think it'll take more than a few other crises to divert the attention from China, both in the US and frankly in India too, where people in the West often question India's own interests or reliability in terms of how it's looking at China. So yes, there's a lot going on. Like you point out, the Ukraine war has preoccupied NATO, the Europeans. The war in Gaza has again preoccupied a lot of resources and worrying a lot of the countries in that region. But frankly, in the long term, if you look at both the Quad and the bilateral statement over the last 2 days, between the lines, it's very clear. Both the US and India see alike a concern in China. They worry about China. They may sometimes disagree on the best way to deal with China. For example, the US is much more comfortable these days in talking about climate, the climate transition to Chinese. India has zero communication with China on any issue of relevance. But certainly, I think the larger arch of convergence is there. Both countries worry about China, and they also want to find a place for China in order that makes this order sustainable and peaceful.
Seema Sirohi, Constantino is of the view that if you read between the lines, read the lines of either the Quad statement or even the bilateral statement when the Prime Minister met with US President Joe Biden, he says India and US are on the same page. But just hours before Prime Minister landed there, this whole meeting with Sikh groups and sort of an underlying commitment being given by White House officials that their concerns will be taken up, that has left a sour note. So much so that the National Security Advisor, ostensibly we're given to understand he stayed back here in India because of the Jammu and Kashmir elections and the security paradigm involved there. But everyone knows that there was this summons issued by a court there in the United States just a few days before the Prime Minister was to land there, making it in a way not possible for one of his top officials to be part of the delegation. That Is this whole Khalistan issue sort of sticking out as a sore thumb?
See, the one thing we have to clarify and distinguish is that the people who met officials at the White House, they're not Khalistanis as we know them. They are Sikh activists from the Legal Defense Fund and, local California-based people, because these were the people who became the voice of the Sikh community after the 9/11 attacks. Remember, the first victim of the post 9/11 violence against Muslims was a Sikh gentleman. So these are activists. The other thing that's happening is this is part of domestic election politics. Democratic Congress people from those regions are under pressure from the Sikh community to speak up for the community with the administration. Because the Republicans are in play, some seats are in danger for the Democrats. All that is going on. On the other issue, but I do agree the timing could have been much better, because for India not to look at it otherwise would be very difficult. That, this has something to do with the alleged assassination plot, which it does actually, because these people who met White House officials were given to understand that they will always be protected by the government of the United States. On the other issue about the summons, the man behind this case, Gurpatwant Singh Panun, he has become like, law unto himself. He knows how to play the game extremely well. He will say things that are just short of violating free speech laws and exploits the situation completely. He filed the case with the idea because the Prime Minister was coming. He knows that. All that is public knowledge. We are told officially that the National Security Advisor did not come because he had other travels coming up very shortly. And, he has sort of headed the ISET, the Initiative on Critical Technologies, from which all of this has flown, on the bilateral front.
Okay.
So but I know that people in India will think, and people here as well, that he didn't come because of the summons.
Okay, let me ask Raymond Vickery. I want to move on to the future, which is that all of this will become less relevant in the next 2 or 3 months, depending on who is going to be the next occupant of the White House, whether it's Kamala Harris or whether it's Donald Trump. And there again, India has certain concerns. If it's a Harris presidency, the fear is all of these issues pertaining to religious freedoms, freedom of minorities, all of these will get further exacerbated. There'll be more attention on those issues, and that's a concern for India. If it's a Trump presidency, we know what his pet peeve has been, whether it's tariffs, whether it's the Harley-Davidson business, and now he's saying a uniform tariff across for all goods that come into the United States, which will be horrible for a developing country like India. So either Republican or Democrat continuance in the White House, there are concerns that India, and genuine concerns that India has.
Well, thanks very much for having me. There's no question that in a relationship between two great democracies, that there are always going to be these kinds of issues. But this should not obscure what has occurred over here in the last 2 days with the visit of Prime Minister Modi, namely with the Quad, a stepping forward by the Prime Minister and by India, not just in terms of the Indo-Pacific, but across the board in world leadership. As you rightly said in your lead-in to this session, the world can't stand 2 wars going on, and it certainly can't stand 3 wars, another one with China at the same time. So the question is, how do we build peace and prosperity? In the past, India has taken a position that Europe's problems are not the world's problems, and has been standoffish. And there's been a sea change, it seems to me, if you read closely the joint declaration of the Quad, and if you look at the speech which was just given today by Prime Minister Modi at the UN. And that is that India is prepared to step forward and play a role across the world as a partner in trying to build peace and prosperity. This is the major news. The major news is not Khalistan and what is happening there. It's not even purchases of oil from Russia and keeping them afloat by Indian oil purchases. It is that India is now assuming what I and others have long advocated, and that is a major and cooperative leadership role as the largest nation on earth and largest democracy.
Rahul Chabra, we've been hearing this for a number of weeks now, that India would not be averse to putting forth some kind of a proposal to put a pause in the Russia-Ukraine war. After all, the Prime Minister was both in Moscow and in Kiev in the matter of a few weeks. Perhaps one of the few world leaders who could have managed to do that in the matter of 4 or 6 weeks. I believe that he has apprised President Biden of his conversations both in Kiev and in Moscow. But we haven't seen the contours of any such proposal. And even if there were one, how realistic is it that both of these countries would agree to a pause in the hostilities?
Yes, you're right that it's not necessary that there is a concrete proposal in that sense on the table, which you can just cross the T's and dot the I's and get it done. This is a conversation. It's going on at many levels with many different interlocutors. So India is one of the big sort of countries involved in it. There are other countries involved in it, and the decisions are going to be taken with, after an amalgam and an analysis of every country's viewpoint being taken on board. So as of now, it is difficult to say that there's actually a proposal and how are we going to go about this one, point 1, 2, 3, 4. So there's nothing like this. This is conveying sort of the sense, the feeling that Prime Minister Modi got. And as you said, he's the only one of the few leaders who's been able to meet both sides and be able to convey each other's the views of these sides, and then to the world at large, including the President Biden at the Quad Summit, to the other important leaders, what is the sense and the feeling that he's getting, which is very important for the others who have never even not met the leaders firsthand, face to face, to be able to get that sense and appreciation and be able to convey that.
Constantino, there's also the concern of what is happening in the neighborhood. While India, of course, is wanting to play a larger role, a bigger role, it's worried about what's happening in the Indo-Pacific. It wants to be an active player in shaping the new Indo-Pacific, and rightfully so. The Quad does have a role in that. But what about the near neighborhood? Look at what's happened in Sri Lanka over the weekend. Today, there's a Marxist president in that country. Look at what's happened in Bangladesh. There was the overthrow of a popularly elected prime minister. And now we are having to host her, and the new government there doesn't seem to have much love lost for India. Again, the Prime Minister met with the Prime Minister of Nepal just yesterday on the sidelines of the UNGA. Again, we've known the history between Mr. Oli and some of his anti-India pronouncements. And of course, Pakistan, I'm not even going there. Is there a concern that while India, on the one hand, wants to play this bigger role, wants a seat at the high table, the near neighborhood is a worry?
I don't think so. I don't buy the sort of either the globe or the region. I think India can walk on 2 feet. It's working in the neighborhood. It is working with other powers in the neighborhood, Japan and the US, unlike in the past. These are countries India is comfortable today to work with. In Sri Lanka, even in Bangladesh, I guess there will be a growing convergence between the US and India in the long term. So while you, I think, lay out the challenges, Zaka, that are obvious in the region, these are not new challenges. I mean, you spoke about a Marxist president elected in Sri Lanka. I remember a gun-wielding Maoist in Nepal that was being followed and chased around by Indian intelligence 20 years ago and became the Prime Minister of Nepal. And has become a major partner of Prime Minister Modi now. So politics will, of course, have ups and downs in the neighborhood. This is a challenging time because there's more of the more than the type of people that are ruling in these countries. It is the volatility. Nepal has had 10 prime ministers in 10 years. In Sri Lanka, we've seen a succession of different presidents and different coalition governments. In Bangladesh, we're seeing more than a political crisis, a large economic crisis playing out in the country. And therefore, India will have to deal with that. But what's different from the past is that India today is working with the other countries to deal with this. You have the US, for example, Development Finance Corporation, putting in $550 million into Sri Lanka, into building up a port terminal there for an Indian company to benefit from, for India's economic interests and Indian export interests to benefit from. Again, you have the US, we're talking about the US today, you have the US putting $500 million into electricity grid connectivity between Nepal and India. Hydropower potential of Nepal that laid stagnant for decades, finally being explored to the benefit of India's consumers and Nepal's exports. So I think across the region, we're seeing India working with the region, through the region, with other partners. I could be speaking of Japan, of the Europeans, of the French, by the way. President Macron, for example, visited Sri Lanka recently. And including Russia, for example. India is also comfortable to work with Russia today to develop Bangladesh nuclear power. So yes, the region is difficult, but it's always been difficult. And actually, I see a lot of positive trend lines across the neighborhood.
Seema Sirohi, the other concern from India's point of view is that ever since President Biden met with President Xi Jinping some months ago in California, there is some kind of informal understanding between the Chinese and the Americans that, look, let's not stir the pot too much. Yes, we're not going to be best of friends, but we're going to keep this sort of simmering because we've got other concerns to take care of. And the view here in India is that means America is taking its eye off the ball when it comes to its long-term and most fundamental threat, which is the rise of China. Has the Quad summit gone to some extent to correct that perception?
Absolutely. I mean, look at the record. President Biden raised the Quad to the leaders level. That's the first action he took after becoming president. They've met 6 times. 4 times in person, twice virtually. Number 3, the export controls they've instituted from Washington that are hurting China. Top-end semiconductor chips can no longer be sold. They're trying to convince the Dutch and the Japanese and the South Koreans to sort of align their policies on all of that. So I would say they have kind of proved that they can walk and chew gum at the same time. There are 2 wars going on. They haven't taken their eye off the Indo-Pacific. The Quad statement, the Wilmington Declaration, as they called it, has got 2 major new initiatives, plus all the others, to show that they can deliver. And the maritime area, the domain awareness where they're sort of sharpening the tools, is very important for convincing other partners in the region, in the Indo-Pacific, that look, democracies mean good for you and there's no danger to your sovereignty. We are helping you to look at your waters more, clearly and to see what illegal stuff is going on. Of course, the finger is pointing at who, because the dragon is always in the room whenever, Quad meets, even though all the 4 countries like to say, oh, it's not about China, it's not against someone, but it is for something, which is, both things can be true. So, yes, I would say the Biden administration has actually, in my humble opinion, exceeded expectations on what they have done vis-a-vis China.
I want to give the final word to Raymond Vickery. Perhaps as a consequence of the 2 wars, perhaps unwittingly, what we're also seeing is a coming together and perhaps a hardening of the alliance or certainly the partnerships between Russia, China, Iran. You can maybe add some countries in the Arab world there as well. And this is in response to America and its own friends and partners and their response, whether it is in Ukraine, whether it is the Israel-Hamas conflict. You're essentially, for want of a better phrase, going back to the days of 2 blocks in the Cold War.
Well, I think there's no question that there is a danger of going back to the Cold War. On the other hand, look at what happened in the Cold War. Basically, it dissipated because people hung together and stood up for democracy and stood up for the rule of law in international relations. And the Soviet Union dissolved. The idea that somehow the standing together of U.S. And India vis-a-vis China is pushing China and Russia closer together, I think is really a pipe dream. The fact is that they've had an unlimited partnership for some time. These issues are difficult, but the real news here is that India is stepping up to be a player in regard to bringing peace and prosperity throughout the world. That's good news for everybody. It's good news in the United States. It's good news in India and around the world. And it seems to me that that's the basic message to come out of the Quad and the visit of Prime Minister Modi to the U.S. This week.
Okay, we'll leave it at that. We'll see how this story plays out. It is, as Constantino said, a tumultuous time in the neighborhood, but it's not a time that India has not been familiar with in the past. Yes, it is wanting a place at the global high table. It is now showing the world it is ready to play a greater role, particularly in the Indo-Pacific. India has very real stakes in the Indo-Pacific, and it was heartening to see the initiatives that have been announced, particularly the Quad at Sea initiative, which is going to be sort of a joint operations between the coast guards of the four countries. Will send out, if you're in Manila today and watching this, or if you're in Seoul and watching this, or if you're in Jakarta and watching this, definitely this sends out a positive signal to these countries. Now, let's shift focus to some domestic stories. It's a shocking crime. It's almost reminiscent of what happened to Shraddha back in Delhi in 2022. A 29-year-old woman identified as Mahalakshmi was found murdered and dismembered in her house in Bengaluru. The body was cut up into 50 different pieces, and it was put inside a running refrigerator which was infested with maggots. There was foul smell which led to the discovery of the body by the neighbors and her estranged family. A crucial development, police have now also found a blue suitcase near the refrigerator. Now, this new evidence suggests that the assailant intended to move the body or transported the victim from another location. Bengaluru police have also formed 6 separate teams to apprehend the culprit. Police sources reveal that the prime suspect may be hiding near the Odisha-West Bengal border. Meanwhile, the National Commission for Women has taken cognizance and has directed the state police to expedite the arrest of all those involved.
Are not very sure on whether the assailant killed her here and cut her body into multiple pieces, because they haven't found any major blood stain over there, apart from the one that is seen coming from the fridge whenever there was a power cut.
Crime suspect has already been identified. We have to physically arrest him. Only then we will know further details.
1,500 हीनस ऑफेंस हुआ है कर्नाटक में. उसमें हीनस मर्डर्स से लेकर लगभग 1,500. कहाँ पे है लैंड ऑर्डर?
All right, Dhruv Jati is a spokesperson of the Congress Party, and Surabhi Hodigere is spokesperson of the Karnataka BJP. Let me start with you, Dhruv, because a woman has been cut up into 50 pieces. Her body is stored in a refrigerator. It takes 2 weeks for the neighbors and the family to alert that something has gone wrong and that she's missing. And it's been, 3-4 days now since we know about this case, and this case has come to light, and not one person has been arrested.
Zaka, firstly, the Congress party condemns this gruesome murder that's taken place in our state. And Karnataka isn't known for such gruesome murders. People across the entire country, across the globe, come to Karnataka for the principles, morals, values that the state is based on. And today is a dark day for every single resident of Karnataka. Irrespective of which political party it is that is in power, it is the state's duty and responsibility to make sure that it protects its citizens, and Article 21 is fully enforced to its full capacity. Now, Zaka, coming to your question about the accused being nabbed, I will lay down the sequence of events that's happened. And to begin with, multiple teams, 6, as you said earlier, have been formed in order to fast track the entire investigation. And based on technical, along with forensic evidence, and with victim and with witness accounts, the accused has been identified. So now, coming to the entire gruesome murder and what has taken place, it's quite shocking, and it's sent waves across the entire state. So teams are tirelessly working.
What does it all amount to? Teams may be tirelessly working, but the assailant is out at large, and so are his accomplices.
Of course, Zaka, and teams have been tirelessly working. Like I said earlier, multiple teams have been formed in order to make sure that the investigation is fast-tracked. And at this point of time, responsible political parties, media, public at large should act diligently in order to make sure that, the accused is caught, and also keeping in mind the privacy of the victim and the suffering that is happening at this point of time.
Okay,
Again,
Surabhi Horigere, you heard Dhruv respond to what he's saying,
and we hope that the accused is nabbed at the earliest.
This is gruesome. Karnataka is not known for this, and that you need to keep patience for a few more days and the accused will be nabbed.
I joined the Congress spokesperson in condemning this horrific incident. Having said that, I think he called for responsible behavior from all segments of society and polity. As a responsible opposition, it is my duty to raise the fact that there has been a 31% increase in murder from 2022 to 24 in Karnataka. There has been a significant increase in crimes against women, 29.9%. This is NCRB data. There has been a lot of news around women, crimes against women, be it Neha Hiremat, be it Anjali, be it the case in Bidar. There was a issue where a woman was tied to a pole in Belgavi. This is what we've been seeing in 2024, and it doesn't take a scientist to draw this correlation that there is some lack of fear against the law and law enforcement agencies that has cropped up in Karnataka since this new government came to power. I'm a woman who is sensitive to, not politicizing these issues, but unfortunately here we are, which is that there is no fear for discrepancy in society against the police, against the state administration, because there's a very casual attitude. When the Rameshwaram blast happened, several ministers in the cabinet said that it was just a cylinder blast. Recently, when the Nagamangala incident happened in Karnataka, the Home Minister brushed it off and said it's a small incident. This casual nature of the administration against crimes, whether it is against women, the most heinous, or crimes against anyone in society, is what is causing this lawlessness. And there is lawlessness, sir, because this is the 7th big case against a woman in September alone in Karnataka. Yes, we are not known for these things, but I think it's very wrong to assume and say, we are not known or not.
So Dhruv, just to say that, Karnataka has not had a history of such violent crime doesn't absolve in any way what's been happening. I mean, you remember the case that happened just a few weeks ago in Bengaluru, where someone just barges into a PG, guest accommodation, and hacks a woman to death. I mean, now this case has happened, Dhruv, where for 2 weeks no one knows that such a person is missing. Her body has been chopped up into 50 pieces and stored in a refrigerator. That's not particularly a great advertisement for law and order.
Zaka, again, irrespective of which political party has been in power in Karnataka for the last decade or so, crimes against women across India, not just in Karnataka for the matter of fact, have been rising. And there are a long list of crimes at the tip of my tongue which can, blot out bunch of crimes against a woman under BJP rule states. But today isn't that day, Zaka. Today is a day where we shouldn't be, pointing fingers at each other. It's a day in which public at large should be assisting the police in order to make sure that the accused is nabbed at the earliest. I mean, it's not difficult for me as a congressperson Congress spokesperson to come and speak about the latest allegations against Muniratna, who is in fact accused of committing acts of genocide in the state of Karnataka. Today isn't that day, Zaka. Today is a day in where
But Dhruv, the main accused is on the border between Odisha and Bengal, as admitted by the cops themselves, the Karnataka police themselves. Now, my point is, who let him get till there?
Zaka, like you said earlier, this is a very rare case. It's not a case where you see people being chopped up and thrown into a refrigerator in Karnataka. It's rare. Nobody knew that the victim was even missing for 2 weeks. I mean, as soon as the police were aware about the entire situation, teams were formed, fast-tracked. The post-mortem was done immediately. We're awaiting reports as we speak. The executive is doing its best to make sure that the accused is nabbed at the earliest. And I think it's important we also acknowledge that. It's important that we acknowledge that the executive is doing its entire best to make sure that the accused is going to be nabbed.
We'll see how soon the accused is nabbed and his accomplices are nabbed. But Surabhi, the charge against the BJP and right-wing ecosystem, right-wing handles on Twitter especially, is you guys were jumping to conclusions saying, oh, there's a Hindu-Muslim angle here, one of the accomplices to this murder is a man named Ashraf, so on and so forth. Today the Bengaluru police have cleared that that's not the case at all.
I don't want to speak for Twitter handles. I will speak for my party, which has been very clear on this issue, that this is it's not an isolated issue. This is an issue of failing law and order in the state. We have been saying this repeatedly as we see numbers in cybercrime increasing against women. We are saying this repeatedly when Neha Hiremat happened, Anjali case happened. There is some fearlessness against the law. When the case happened again in Hubli, in Anjali's situation, the family had gone to the police station and requested for an FIR to be filed. Now, this is something we see as a common trend across such cases, which is that filing of FIR, police responses, these are really bad. I want to speak a few words about Bengaluru in specific and why we think that the Congress party is not doing enough for preventive measures, and whether they have formed a team immediately after or not is not the benchmark that we are holding them to. The benchmark is what are you doing, knowing that there has been an increase in numbers. There has been no significant policy decision or reaction or action from the state government to ensure that Bengaluru's women are safe, given the number of crimes that have been happening. There have been no significant action against the different cases that have happened from the Belgavi incident, which happened, by the way, when the Legislative Assembly was sitting in session there. There have been no such, proactive measures to take women along, confidence of women activists. None of this has happened from the government.
Okay, let's see how this plays out in Bengaluru. We hope, for the sake of the victim's family, that whoever did this to her, this absolutely appalling, unspeakable crime and the horror of it, that person and his accomplices are brought to justice as quickly as is possible. We leave it at that. Thank you very much to Surabhi Hodugere and Dhruv Jatti. Let me now go to the deep dive here on Brass Tacks. There is now a new government-elect in Sri Lanka, a new president. Marxist leader Anura Kumara Dissanayake is the winner of the Sri Lankan presidential election. The question is, how is this going to impact India on the diplomatic front? Is there a fear, given his party's rather violent ways in the past, and of course the concern now about his leanings towards China? What may that mean for India's interests in the island nation?
ශ්‍රී ලංකාවේ ව්‍යවස්ථාවට සහ නීතියට අනුකූලව අවංකව ඉටු කරන බවටද ශ්‍රී ලංකා ජනජයට පක්ෂපාත වන බවටද මාගේ උපරිම ශක්ති ප්‍රමාණයෙන් ශ්‍රී ලංකා ප්‍රජාතාන්ත්‍රික සමාජවාදී ජනරජයේ ශ්‍රී ලංකාවේ දේශය තුල වෙනම රජයක් පිහිටවීමට
Anura Kumara Dissanayake was elected president of Sri Lanka on Sunday. He was able to ride on a wave of popular anger at the established political order which has dominated Sri Lanka for the last 50 years. The country, which was on the brink of economic collapse 2 years ago, saw its first presidential election since an IMF bailout which rescued it from the brink. This is a remarkable turnaround for Dissanayake and his left-wing party, the JVP, after he had won just 3% of the vote in the last election in 2019. From a mere 3% to now over 40% in the space of one election cycle is truly a remarkable turnaround for the 50-year-old party that he heads, the Janata Vimukti Peramuna, and for its leader, who is popularly known by his initials, AKD. The extreme left-wing party, which led two unsuccessful armed uprisings against the Sri Lankan state, one in 1971 and the other in 1987, is today at the center of Sri Lanka's polity. It was brought to power after popular and angry protests at the state of the economy, which was believed to be run to the ground by the Rajapaksa family. The popular outpouring of anger, called Aragalaya, or simply protest in Sinhalese, culminated in the toppling of the then strongman president Gotabaya Rajapaksa. He fled the capital city Colombo and lived abroad for a period of time. Anura Dissanayake, 55 years old, had in recent years led a rebranding effort of his party that was once known for deadly armed insurrections. He managed to build a large coalition, he softened some of the radical positions of his party, and he pitched it as the alternative to the deeply rooted politics of patronage which has dominated Sri Lanka and dominated by the two main parties, the SLFP and the UNP. Dissanayake secured 42% of the high voter turnout in Saturday's election. His closest competitor, the opposition leader Sajith Premadasa, received just about 33% of the votes cast, and the incumbent president, 75-year-old Ranil Wickremesinghe, managed just a mere 17% of the vote. In a sign of how enormous a swing it was in the island nation's political landscape, Disanayake's immediate challenge would be to form his new cabinet. As per Sri Lanka's system, the cabinet ministers must come from the parliament, where the new president's party only has 3 seats. His officials, though, say that the new president has constitutional options to oversee the work of these ministries, while he calls for new parliamentary elections in the coming few months. Parliament will have to be dissolved because this parliament has already lost the mandate of the people. In Sri Lanka's ranked choice election system, voters can mark either one candidate on their ballot, or they can list out 3 candidates in order of preference. If no candidate gets more than 50%, then a second round of counting factors in the preferences of those voters whose first choice did not make it to the top 2. At the end of a peaceful vote on Saturday, the government had made a surprise announcement, overnight curfew, even as the counting had begun. There were fears of some kind of a coup, once again to keep the established political order going. But those fears did not come to pass, as by Sunday morning it was clear that Dissanayake had created a big political upset of sorts. He railed against the prevailing consensus in Sri Lanka's politics against both the SLFP and the UNP, which have dominated for the last 50 years. There was also high praise from leaders of the country's minority groups, as well as from activists, for an election campaign which was unlike any other in the past. It was not violent, it was not divisive. This time, the campaigns had happened largely without any recourse to racial or religious chauvinism. Even though Disanayake's party has in the past been accused of being anti-Tamil and anti-Muslim, the two major minorities in Sri Lanka. There have been concerns in neighbouring India about some of the extreme positions taken by Dissanayake and his party in the past. The JVP is perhaps the only mainstream party in the Sri Lankan system which has not agreed to the full implementation of the 13th Amendment. This would pave the way for the full devolution of powers to local provinces, including the northern province, which is dominated by the minority Tamils. That was one of the cornerstone clauses of the 1987 Indo-Sri Lanka Peace Accord. Dissanayake is also perceived to be pro-China given his party's Marxist leanings. But he did make an official visit earlier this year to New Delhi and met with Foreign Minister Dr. Jaishankar. In his first comments after the win, the president-elect has also said that he wants better ties with all countries, including with India. India would not want a return of Chinese influence after the Rajapaksa years, when major projects like the Colombo port, the Hambantota airport and port, and others were given to Chinese companies. It took a near economic collapse and $4 billion of Indian assistance for some of that goodwill towards India to return to the island nation. It is the first time that a presidential election in Sri Lanka has appeared to be genuinely multi-pronged. It is a stark contrast to what has been a history of direct competition between the two major parties, the SLFP and the UNP, or coalitions headed by these two parties, and these politics have dominated ever since Sri Lanka became a republic in 1972. The popular protest movement Aragalaya that forced the powerful Rajapaksa clan out of power in 2022 threw open the political landscape. The dominant feeling among a vast majority of poor Sri Lankans was a sense of anger and a sense of being let down by the political system. When Gotabaya Rajapaksa had put accusations of war crimes during the country's bloody civil war back in 2009, he had put those accusations behind him. He made a handsome win in the 2019 election, but then within the next few months, because COVID struck, his management of the Sri Lankan economy led to his downfall. Before its fall, the Rajapaksa government had become a family affair. The two brothers, Mahinda and Gotabaya Rajapaksa, had served as president and prime minister, taking turns. There were also others in the clan who had held several ministries and key positions, but its fall has been so thorough that Namal Rajapaksa, who is the family's 38-year-old political heir, in this election finished a distant fourth. He had a single-digit share of the votes. Ranil Wickremesinghe, the 75-year-old political survivor who stepped in as interim president after Gotabaya Rajapaksa fled the country when protesters surrounded his house, has helped stabilize the country. He's negotiated a bailout package with the International Monetary Fund. And now Anura Dissanayake, who has positioned his National People's Power Coalition, built around his old party, the JVP, as the largest partner, is best positioned to deliver the public demands of the protest movement. They want Sri Lanka's deeply entrenched political system of patronage and corruption to be cleaned up. He's also brought in new faces at the top. He's focused on reaching out to mobilizing women who were a particularly big constituency for him and who are particularly hard hit by the economic collapse of the country. He's also softened his own party's old radical Marxist messaging. The economy was a central issue in the campaign, with poorer people continuing to feel the pinch of austerity measures that the interim government had put in place. They had increased taxes, they reduced subsidies, and all of this was hurting the poor very much. The economic collapse saw poverty rates double, with a quarter of the population of Sri Lanka today living below the poverty line. In the end, it is the vast majority of the poor of Sri Lanka who brought forth the son of an agricultural labourer from Anuradhapura into the highest office of the land.
विश्व की सबसे तेजी से ग्रो करने वाली इकोनॉमी है और मैं पक्का मानता हूं कि मेरा ये जो तीसरा कार्यकाल है उसमें हम थर्ड लार्जेस्ट इकोनॉमी का हमारा जो गोल है उसको हम अचीव कर लेंगे.
My colleague Siddhant is with us on the broadcast. Siddhant, this is day 2 of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's visit. We are, of course, waiting for him to address the UNGA, which is called the Summit of the Future. First of all, what can be expected will be his line there as far as the Prime Minister is concerned? Is it going to be taking a cue from what was discussed at the Quad Summit of all the 4 world leaders?
Well, Greha, as far as Summit of the Future address of Prime Minister Modi is concerned, it's going to be very, very significant. In fact, we could see Prime Minister touching upon his visits to Russia and Ukraine. We could also expect Prime Minister Modi to give message of peace from that dais. And in fact, the sources have also confirmed to me that there is going to be something big on Russia-Ukraine conflict. Prime Minister would not only touch upon the conflict, but he could possibly give some kind of a solution also to the world, how peace can be restored in Europe. And the second focus of Prime Minister Modi is going to be the concerns of the countries from the global South Korea, because India just organized Global South Summit in the month of August. In that, Prime Minister heard the concerns, the problems of the countries from the global south, and India is projecting itself right now as a strong voice of global south. So we could expect Prime Minister Modi to perhaps tell the world what countries from global south are going through, how the wars have impacted these countries, and how important it is to restore peace so that the economy can boom. These countries should not be left out because right now, Griha, these countries are at a risk of being left out from the global growth momentum. So that would perhaps also be the Prime Minister's talking point in the address. So all eyes are going to be on that key address of Prime Minister Modi at Summit of the Future.
Right, and he's also just been part of that Tech CEOs roundtable. He has underlined about India's own growth story, India's technological prowess. He talks about how very soon India is going to be touching upon the 6G technology. About all of that, Siddhant, considering many of those CEOs were important faces, and that too Indo-American faces.
Well, absolutely. So it was a very important CEO roundtable which Prime Minister chaired. In fact, CEOs from 15 top IT and tech companies of United States participated in the roundtable. Prime Minister's message was, come and invest in India. Be a part of India's growth story. That was Prime Minister's message to all the CEOs. In fact, there were CEOs from the semiconductor.
That sets the national agenda is back.
When there are elections in a country and they give you results you don't like, you call them electoral autocracy.
With an unmatched legacy across India's important cities.
There is no such thing as a BJP foreign policy or a Congress foreign policy. There's only India's foreign policy.
Featuring policymakers at the heart of shaping the nation and economy.
It was this government which has amended the minimum alternative tax.
Alongside India's most iconic voices from diverse fields.
सोनू के टीटू की स्वीटी वो फिल्म थी जिसने मुझे घरों तक पहुंचाया.
Bangalore is absolutely the startup capital of the country.
To spark debate and engage in uninhibited conversations.
एकनाथ जी मुख्यमंत्री बनेंगे, ये बात तो मुझे पहले से पता थी.
In the only town hall that matters and about to get bigger, better and more impactful. CNN News 18 Town Hall. Presented by
Google CEO Sundar Pichai was also there, and the other companies which are doing business in biotechnology, semiconductors, artificial intelligence, etc., etc. So it was a very important CEO roundtable which Prime Minister chaired in New York, and after which in fact held 3 bilateral meetings also. One with the Prime Minister of Palestine, which is very important, Griha.
Yes.
And in fact, Prime Minister reiterated India's principal position on Israel-Palestine issue. Prime Minister also met KP Oli, the Prime Minister of Nepal, in New York. Remember, KP Oli has not visited India yet. So with that regard, this visit is also very significant. And Prime Minister also met the Crown Prince of Kuwait, and in fact Prime Minister thanked Crown Prince of Kuwait for taking care of Indian diaspora because Kuwait has largest Indian diaspora. Back to you.
Absolutely. Also, Siddhant, since you mentioned semiconductor, there has been a very, very crucial deal between India and US that's been inked as far as the semiconductor